Welcome to She Became Visible. I'm Rene Steelman, your host, and I have for today my guest is Britt Hartley. If any of you are familiar with the Almost Awakened podcast, you will know that Britt is the co-host of Almost Awakened, and her and Bill Reel. It's such a nice, refreshing oasis of podcasts to listen to if you have deconstructed from a fundamental religion and you are struggling to remember who you are, discover who you are, or find out how you even land in this world without that laid out plan that was given to you that you accepted for all those years. But Britt and Bill both have a way of just their voices are very calming. So even if you didn't hear a thing they said, rather than listen to ocean music or chakra, anything, sound bowls, just turn on Britt and Bill. It's the same as a sound bowl. It's even better. So Britt, thank you for taking time out of your day. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I love you guys. Go to her website. It's no nonsense spirituality.com. And she introduces herself on there. And I love the way you describe your about. But because don't go there now. Everyone's going to stay right here and listen to us. Just give a brief introduction to who you are and why you became such a Zen shaman for all of us.
Zen shaman. It's so nice to be with you, and it's so nice to be on this podcast. I hear great things about this podcast, especially for my female clients have mentioned this podcast. So I'm so honored to be here today. And yeah, my name is Britt Hartley. I live in Boise, Idaho, and I have, a long story like anybody else, and we can go into that as little or as much as you'd like. But essentially, I had a faith transition at some point in my journey. And kind of when you get through that phase and you realize for a lot of people, for me, it was polygamy. It was about 12 years ago. That was my kind of big faith transition. And that, rocked me like it did a lot of people. And so for a couple years, I was, there wasn't all these cool podcasts and TikTok. It was much harder back when I did it. These kids can deconstruct so easily now.
Walked a mile in the snow both ways.
Oh my gosh. I was reading microfilms. I mean, it was not as easy back then.
No.
But eventually after some time, you kind of say, okay, I've processed this. I kind of have a sense of the Mormon story and my part in it. What's next? And that's the part that I really love playing in, and that I still continue to play in. So the podcast that I do with Bill is Almost Awakened. And essentially, even though we both come from a Mormon background and we have, in other spaces, we'll talk about Mormonism. This podcast is really just for, okay, what's next? Mm-hmm. And so we're really having fun talking about, okay, if you've spent time studying Mormon polygamy and you've done that whole dive and you've listened to 8-hour Mormon stories podcasts, and people kind of go through that phase. And then the what's next is, how do we take this baby, which I would say is spirituality, out of the bathwater, right? There's religious trauma, especially for women. You've lost your voice at some point, probably when you were a child. There's there's lots of bathwater there, right, that we can wash away. But there is a baby in that too, right? And so that baby is, there's rituals. Those are scientifically helpful. What do we do about death? What about morality and ethics? What about your story? What about your meaning and purpose and community and shadow work and inner child work and awe and transcendence? There's science behind a lot of those things. And so when you walk away, if you choose to either nuance or walk away from a religious tradition, there's a lot of things that will need to be replaced, or there's a baby to hold on to and not wash away, or else you're losing a lot of tools. And so that's essentially what I try to do with spirituality, and why I do no nonsense spirituality is, how can I get these tools and not require any beliefs from you, or not trigger your religious trauma? How can we individually and in families and in communities hold on to these tools and not kind of require some of the belief hoops that we had to jump into that that religious people from religious trauma will just not be able to do again. That's too triggering. And so that's kind of where I like to hang out now.
That's so great. And I think you were the one that introduced me to Sam Harris. And so I became, I went down that rabbit hole for a long time, and I love Sam Harris. And one of the things, I think it was Sam that was explaining how if you tell him where you grew up and a little bit about your family dynamics. I grew up in the Midwest with two heterosexual white parents, blah, blah, blah. He'll say, oh, you're Christian, or if you say, I grew up in the Middle East and my parents, they'll say, oh, you're Muslim, and so one of the hardest things, and then like you say, I've been in the church for over 50 years. And so I have been ingrained with Sunday morning. This is what you do. And so now I kind of walk around going, wait, that was my reason to get my kids up and dressed and cute little outfits. And, we're going to all match on Sunday. It's Easter, blah, blah, blah. The whole, like you say, there was just this thing that you did for 50 years. And all of a sudden I'm like, bye, honey, see you later. And we're just going to watch Sunday morning on TV. And at first I thought, well, I'm going to replace that. I'm going to find a church, a Christian church that I can go to. And I went to a couple of them. And I'm like, oh, you did not just say that. Oh, please tell me you did not just say that. Like I went to the pastor had on a flannel and a baseball cap and jeans, and there was the rock band behind him and everything. And then he's
one of those cool pastors.
Yeah. Yeah. And he started talking about, those Scottsdale women and, with their plastic surgery. And I'm like, dude, no, read the room here. I mean, it's like, no, you can't.
Some othering. Yeah, some
exactly. othering. Or I have my husband plays golf with a guy, and they go to this other church. And when they found out that I had left the Mormon church, then they were like, well, tell Rene to come. And I said, well, ask Howard, how do they feel about LGBTQ community? And, and he's like, oh, no. I was like, no, that's not happening. So, so you're lost. And then, like you say, there's these rituals that are so important. And it's like, oh, Easter egg hunt in my backyard. That's my grandkids. I have, a gazillion videos of the Easter egg hunt. Do we not do Easter anymore? Or do I just, I mean, it can go on and on. And then, so I'm like, someone like you is such a needed commodity for finding some kind of spirituality. And I love how you referenced, I don't remember whether it was in the one that you just did or the one with Bill, the number 125, when you talked about secular Buddhism with Noah. And I loved that because that was, I have such a indoctrinated black and white perfectionism mindset that I was like, well, I'd like to be Buddha, but I'm going to eat meat. So I guess I can't be Buddhist, or I'm not going to meditate. I'm with Brene Brown on meditation. It's like, I'm going to go for a walk or go for a run and not sitting still. Not going to happen for me. And so I was like, but then I listened to him and I was like, oh, I can go for a walk and count that as meditation. Okay.
I can't tell you, and I have to say this just because you have such a strong female audience. I cannot tell you how many times I have a client. So I do spiritual direction. So I meet with clients who are at various points of their faith journey. And I don't, press my own beliefs onto them. It's a companion kind of experience where I essentially walk into their spiritual home and say, okay, what DIY project can we do together to make this home more like, you and your authentic self? But I can't tell you how many women I'll ask them something like, what fills your spiritual cup, or what resonates with you, or what calls to you spiritually? And they'll say something like, well, I try to meditate, but I have so many kids and I just can't, my mom brain is always going when I try to sit on my mat. And so I don't meditate. And I try to read books that everybody says to read, but then I'm just so tired by the end of the day. And they'll say something like, so I'm just not very spiritual. And it honestly, it almost brings me to tears each time, because what happens in spirituality, and this is across the board, including Buddhism, is that because these holy books were written by men, the rituals and the spiritual practices are really driven by a male experience, right? That you have time to sit on a mat for an hour and meditate. That's fantastic. I don't know a single mom with young kids who can do that, right? And so they just feel, well, I guess I'm just not spiritual right now. And so it took a lot of work for me. And there's a lot of beautiful work. One of my favorite books is Wild Mystic. That's great for this. And it's this idea that just broadening the definition of what it means to be spiritual. Because here's what happens. If a man goes to India for 3 weeks and goes on a meditation retreat, they'll come back and we'll honor him. Or if he goes on Instagram and he sits in a perfect lotus pose, we'll say, oh, that guy is really like in touch. He's very spiritual. We'll listen to what he has to say. And he'll talk about, oh, I did all this ego dissolving work when I was in India. And we'll say, oh, wow. And then if a woman in the middle of the night gets woken up, and in that moment, she has to choose her own desires, which is, I really want to go to sleep. And I'm going to, I'm so upset. I just want some sleep. But the child has thrown up on the floor and it's the middle of the night. And she chooses in that moment love. She chooses to show up for the child and comfort the child and clean the floor in the middle of the night with no one noticing. And the sad thing that breaks my heart is we'll see the guy doing ego dissolving meditations in India as spiritual work, but we'll expect a woman to do that and not recognize it as spiritual. Not, if you want to know what ego dissolving work is, ask a mother who gets up in the middle of the night and cleans up poo. That'll dissolve your ego real quick, right? That's choosing love in an amazing way. And so some of this work, as we're coming from, if you're coming from a religion where the holy books were written by men or some kind of patriarchy, is redefining what spirituality looks like from the female perspective. A lot of that has to do with our work in our families. Why is it that, a sacrament is a ritual, but me making a meal for my family and connecting with them and then ritualistically kind of cleaning off the counter the way that I always clean off the counter, why is that not a ritual? And so there's a lot there that I work with as far as female clients of reclaiming, like you're saying, it's just someone giving you permission that a walk is just as valuable of a spiritual experience as the people who sit cross-legged perfectly and do an hour meditation, right? And so a lot of that is just reclaiming the female experience. And it's something I'm super passionate about because it breaks my heart every time a woman says, I don't have a spiritual life. And I see it everywhere, but they've never gotten permission to claim that.
Okay, I'm going to try and get through this hour without breaking out into tears. But when you said that on your Facebook page, and I thought, we're so, what is the word, pedestalized as far as our role as women and mothers. We're put on this pedestal, but then we're also degraded for not having read our scriptures and every day or whatever these things are that we're supposed to do. And yet it's like, but did you recognize that I got up 3 times in the night and nursed my baby in the peace and quiet, held my baby to my breast, fed him milk that you couldn't do, but I was willing and anxious and excited to disrupt my schedule to do this for this baby. You didn't recognize that as just as much as like you say, going to your priesthood meeting, or as President Nelson, going to his priesthood meeting and then going home and feeding the women that were making donuts so that they could feel the spirit. And it was like, that's the kind of stuff that just completely drains women of their self-worth, their value. They just think, oh, I guess I have to do more. I always constantly have to do more. Where all this guy had to do was get up, put on a tie, and go sit in a pew. And somehow, so when you said
and we
that,
listen to him.
Yeah, it was like, oh, thank you for acknowledging. I knew I loved that, but I didn't know that it was sanctioned or authorized as spirituality. I wasn't given permission to accept that. So that was a lot.
Yeah, and you and I talked about that a little bit because you reposted some of that with your son,
Yeah.
and it really touched me when you posted that. It brought me to tears because the thing that is so hurting about watching Mormon women, even in leadership, is that even if we were to get a general conference where the women speak mostly, you know,
Mhm.
some people say, you know, let's just give women equal time or more time, you know,
Mhm.
and I get the sense that that wouldn't do anything, that wouldn't change anything, because the women who are in those positions of leadership get up on the stand and then they quote men,
Right.
not their own experience, not other
Right.
women.
Right.
They quote the men. And
Yeah.
so it's a woman who is echoing this kind of male experience or male spirituality or doctrine. And so it wouldn't matter if we got more time, because the women who had a different kind of spirituality, a really feminine spirituality, were never given permission, were not seen, didn't feel like they had a space there, and they left a long time ago. And so
Mhm.
it makes me, you know, so when I'll hear feminists or people say, let's just give the women more time. And I'm like, that's not going to do it.
What would
That's
they
not going to do
say?
anything. What would they
Yeah.
say? They're just going to repeat everything that's already being said.
Right.
So something deeper has to go on, which is women claiming their spirituality. And that that takes a little bit of work, because again, if the books are written by men,
Mhm.
there's no space for honoring getting up in the middle of the night and people recognizing that that is a deeply spiritual experience, where you have to choose love, where you
Mhm.
have to listen to your body and tell your body, I'm going to do this even though you don't want to, or even
Yeah.
when it hurts, or I'm choosing love, right? There's all these meditations where you choose love and you kind of let go of your ego and do all these things. And women are already doing this. But again, like you say, because we expect women to do it, we don't validate the hero's journey that mothers go through. We just
Right.
expect that everyone is a natural mother. And then we
Right.
wonder why mothers are at home depressed,
Mhm.
feeling like they're not enough, and all these things that we all experienced as mothers with young children, when you really lose yourself in that process. And
Right.
yet it's not valued as a journey. It's just something expected. And that really breaks my heart. It really does a lot of damage.
Yeah, it does. So tell us how you went, because I love the fact that where you are today, your spiritual journey started out with someone who had a disconnect at a young age, which I am like, well, no wonder she is who she is, because at 16 you recognized, I'm not comfortable with this. I think you mentioned that the standards for youth book had come out and you read it and you were like, struggling with this one a little bit. At 16, which I think is amazing, because at 16, I was like, okay, whatever. Is there a dance on Friday? Whatever. I'm going to find a handsome man and marry him tomorrow, And, so I was totally wrapped up in this. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to graduate from high school. I guess I'm supposed to get married, right? I mean, isn't that what it is? I better go to that dance again on Friday and
Mm.
Saturday. And so tell a little bit about how you went from, I'm going to make this work, I'm going to make this church work, to this church doesn't work.
Yeah. So I had kind of three parts to my faith crisis. Some people really do it just all at once, and
Mhm.
mine was kind of three parts. And so the first one was, yeah, I was around 15 or 16. The For Strength of Youth pamphlet had come out. It was very big. But I come from a family of open debaters and open
Mm.
thinkers. We were allowed to my parents are both educators, and so we were
Mhm.
kind of allowed to at least think about things, or what do you think about this, in politics or religion. So I had some basis to in my family to, you know, think about things or debate about things, and I really value that from my family. My
Mhm.
dad was somewhat nuanced later on. At the time, though, probably not as much, but um, at the time, yeah, so the pamphlet had come out and it was really presented to me in young women's and seminary and Sunday school as, this is God, right? This is what God requires of you.
Mm.
And there was something just kind of in my bones. Of course, I'm a teenager, and so I don't have eloquent words for this. I can't say like, I'm having cognitive dissonance and I'm going to,
Yeah.
I'm not going to use
Yeah.
those words. I'm just going
Yeah.
to rebel, right? And so it
Yeah.
just came out in rebellion. Because I just looked at this, the paragraph on tattoos or whatever it was, and I'm just like, of everything going on in the world, I was already super into history, really loved my history classes, thought I, really wanted to be a history teacher. And so I already had a sense of like, God cannot possibly be like this petty about tattoos or like care this much about this little thing. Like the world is so big and there's so much suffering. And what about all these other religions? And I just could not, I just had cognitive dissonance, but I didn't have words to be able to handle that. So it came out in rebellion, and that rebellion was especially, having sex with a boyfriend, which was, a pretty big rebel move to take for a teenager with two active LDS parents. And this really, terrified my parents. And so I was removed from my home and placed in my aunt and uncle's home. And so my senior year of high school, I had lost a lot. I had lost my family. Really didn't know what I believed. I was really, really lost. And in this home, so my uncle was a bishop. He had these kind of old church books, as people have gospel libraries, and I was digging into them. And I kind of stumbled upon nuanced Christianity and nuanced Mormonism. Just kind of the deeper thinkers, the deeper doctrines that were somewhat interesting. And I think for me at the time, it was a life raft of being able to reconnect to my family that I had lost because I was just so broken. And so I was reading this kind of deeper, kind of more academic, intellectual strand of Mormonism that's not so petty about, tattoos and little things like that, but bigger ideas. And there was enough there that was like, okay, I'll do this kind of Mormonism. If I can do this kind of Mormonism, this nuancey Mormonism, I can do that, and I'll be able to reconcile with my family. And so that was essentially, so by the age of about 17, 18, I was kind of in a nuanced Mormon place. I didn't know that was the word for it, but it essentially was.
Right.
And yeah, just didn't know that was a thing, but there was enough kind of academic Mormon messages that were interesting to me. And I went to BYU Idaho. I had a good experience at BYU Idaho just because I was in the history department, and history history teacher Mormons, they're just a different brand of Mormon.
Right.
They'll talk to you about polygamy. They have very welcoming views of other religions. It was a very, I really liked it there. I had actually a really good experience there. And, 19, got married, as one does, which is so dumb. Oh my gosh.
Especially when you have children of your own now.
Oh my gosh.
I have a granddaughter that's going to be 17 next month, and I'm just like, oh, no, that's very young. No, you can't do that,
No, just a child. And, left to BYU Idaho, and for a while just really liked being a nuanced Mormon, and that worked for me. And then I did become a history teacher, had my first child, and it was my first time that I was home, not working, right, home with a baby. And so I took polygamy essentially off my shelf and said, okay, baby's sleeping, I have a minute here, I'm going to take this off the shelf and deal with it. And had a pretty big faith crisis, right? It revealed a side of Mormonism and doctrine and prophethood. Just give me 1 second and let me bark at my kids who are being
Absolutely.
Hey, kids.
I love that she's doing that. This is the reality. I was listening to, I think, Scott Galloway, who I love. And he was saying how when people talk about how at your funeral, people are going to talk about what you did for them or how you made them feel, and it's the little things in life. And he was just saying, why do football players, who have just torn their ACL, they're like, mom. It's like, because the moms did the little things.
Hmm.
And so it's those little tiny things that you do over a lifetime that build up to where, you're anyway. So go on. Yeah.
I used to be super embarrassed when my kids are kind of in the background, but it's kind of a permission to myself that I allow myself to have conversations and work,
Yep.
and that my children, I'm not going to be embarrassed or remove myself from the world just because I have a child.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that just seems like an unnecessary pressure that we put on ourselves as women. Anyway,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
where am I? Where am I
So
in
you
my
were
story
studying
here?
polygamy and
Oh,
you're
I'm
like,
studying polygamy.
no.
Blows
Yeah.
up, right? So I had everything that you kind of would imagine with a faith crisis, real loss of identity, real that feeling that the floor is dropping from under me and I don't know what's going on. And at the time, again, this is 12 years ago, so like there's no podcast, there's no
No.
church history essays. Like it was very, very isolating.
There's no Lindsay Hansen Park.
There's no, oh my gosh, do you know how much that would have helped me? Like I
Yeah.
was digging into these books in my room alone. And I could do some of it because I had at least enough, history education that I could go through microfilms and try to make sense of this. But yeah, it's a lot easier now. I'm
Yeah.
very jealous of that.
Exactly.
And but that's my story, and part of my journey was kind of digging into that, and had a pretty significant faith crisis. And at that time, I kind of stepped back and said, you know what, Mormonism may not be one true church, but there are good things here. It's one of many paths to God, is kind of how I came out of that space. So I continued to go to church from time to time. I even taught seminary after having a faith crisis because I still loved teaching good spirituality. And I kind of approached it just the way any mystic person would approach religion, of just, here's some spiritual principles that I can pull out of here that are good. And I'm going to leave kind of the not good aside and just, not worry about that too much.
Right.
And so I still could attend church, but didn't believe it was one true church, and was highly nuanced, and still enjoyed teaching good spiritual principles wherever I could find them in the text.
Right.
And then maybe about 5 years ago, the last kind of part of my faith journey, and this is where I really have a lot of resonance with this community, is because I went through it too. Sometimes for some people, when the bulldozer of deconstruction starts taking down walls, it really doesn't stop until there's nothing. And so kind of the last part of my journey is, I'm not sure if we have free will. I'm not even sure there's a God anymore. I like Jesus as a person, or some of the stories, but Jesus really may not be coming. We really may just be on this planet in a dark universe that doesn't care. And what is my meaning of life if that's true? And so another deeper kind of layer of faith crisis, of identity crisis. And that's where you run into nihilism, where not only do you lose your beliefs, but you lose essentially your ability to have any beliefs is just completely taken out. It's been bulldozed. You're essentially naked to the universe. And that's a very scary place to be. It took some study and reaching out to other people who could help me in that place to be able to come out on the other side. And you can come out the other side. And the beautiful thing about having your bulldozer really take down your spiritual home to nothing is that what you have to do then is, okay, if this is where I am, what kind of home do I really want? What kind of life do I really want to have? What kind of life is really worth living for me? And really getting honest about that question, because people's expectations, that's all been bulldozed. God's expectations of you, you don't even know how do you want to address that. That's not driving you anymore. And so in that space of the ashes, essentially, is a really beautiful, I know now, being on this other side, is actually a really beautiful space to create a life that is intentionally you, which is something that you talk about on this podcast a lot.
Right, right.
And so there was kind of, 3 layers to that journey, kind of nuanced Mormon to kind of like nuanced God believer to kind of losing all of that, but still building on the other side a deeply authentic spiritual life that's really unique to me and really flourishing, and relationships that are deeper, and all really good things, but it came from rebuilding that spiritual home. And now I get a lot of meaning and purpose in life by being a spiritual director and being that person that
Right.
was there for me when I was in that space and didn't know how do I put myself together again. And I enjoy doing that work with other people now.
So that it's interesting that you would mention that and put that together, because your last podcast that you did, you talked about the Greek mythology and the different gods and the story behind all of the gods. And one of the stories that you were talking about was Chiron. And then the quote that you gave, and I can't remember what it was, I'm sure you do, but about how the hole or the damage that you go through is that the light goes through that damage so that then you turn around and help others that are also being damaged in that same area. And I was like, oh, because I always used to, I think I started to say when I was a Laurel advisor, we had just moved into a downtown Portland ward, and any kind of a, downtown area, there was just a lot of stuff going on. The girls that were my Laurels, one of them wasn't there yet, but she was on the rolls because she was pregnant and she was down in a home in Salem, Oregon, and waiting for her baby to be born. And as soon as the baby was given away, she would come back and return to her teenage life. And then one of the other girls was on discipline because she had had sex with her boyfriend. So she was on a discipline. And one of the girls came from a home of 10 kids with a father who, couldn't support the family. And, she had to, everywhere she went, she had to bring all her belongings with her so that her brothers and sisters wouldn't steal them. And the bishop's son was going through drug stuff. And it was just one of those, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on in this ward, And, but I just remember that when the one girl had gone through what she had gone through, and so then she wanted to then become a drug and alcohol counselor because of what she had experienced. I remember thinking, is that the best thing for someone who's struggling with drugs and alcohol to be a drug and alcohol counselor? But then when the way you explained it, I was like, of course it is. That's exactly who you want to be your counselor,
Yeah.
And, or someone I had a friend that is just going on his fun little, I'm a lawyer, I have a great family, we have a house in Hawaii and everything's great. And then he had a heart attack. All of a sudden he's working for the American Heart Association and he's doing fundraising and stuff. So, one of the problems with trying to run a nonprofit is that's what everybody does. They go to the nonprofit or the charitable service that resonates with them because they have a child or they had a dad that had cancer or leukemia or whatever, St. Jude's. And so it's really hard to get people to, no, I know you love your puppy, but don't give any more money to that. Give it to me, But that's where your heart goes, is where you've been damaged and where that hole's been made. And so that's what you did with your spirituality. You mentioned in your thing that you had theological. So then did you go back to a theological program to study?
Yeah. So so it was, and this is actually not uncommon, but yeah, when I was trying to figure out God, I have a mentor who does open and relational theology, which is a kind of God that isn't controlling and very love-based, and the future is open, there's not a specific plan, a relational God. And I thought it was really interesting. It was kind of my last, like, ooh, that's a really interesting God. Maybe there's enough here to hold on to. And I think it was a little, if I'm being honest with myself, it was a little bit fear-driven. I was looking for a way to hold on to my faith in God because my studies at the time were really stripping that belief. And I didn't want that to happen. I wasn't setting out to do that. I've been in the spiritual space and interested in spiritual things for a long time. And so I had a lot of identity wrapped into God existing. So that was very painful. But
Mhm.
yeah, so after kind of my second faith crisis, when I'm trying to make sense of God, I do go back to theological school, and I have a master's degree in the future of American religion.
Mm.
But through that process, and that's not uncommon for people to go to, even at BYU, they'll tell kids who want to go into Old Testament studies, for example, oh, don't go into that field because there's not a single person who comes back like teaching the narrative, essentially,
Right,
because it's
right.
gonna really challenge your view of scripture if you do that. And it was like that for me and God.
Yeah.
um, Theological, and not for everyone, but theological school and working with these deeply ended up uh, accelerating my beliefs in God that were fading for me. And when I say the word God, I mean an actual being, not some people redefine God as transcendence, or a feeling of love, or a feeling of connection, or a ground of being, and I'm okay with using God in those ways.
Mhm.
But yeah, a specific kind of being, creator of the universe, that
Mhm.
being a part of theological school um, helped kind of strip some of that, rather than helped buoy my faith in a
Mm.
sense.
So do you favor one belief over another one right now? Currently, would you call, if someone said, what faith do you follow? Do you say, well, I'm Buddhist or I'm Hindu or whatever? Or do you just say I'm spiritual?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I do have some titles. I mean, I'm an ordained Sufi, and a Sufi is the mystic form of Islam.
Mm.
And I play in Christianity, and I play in Mormon spaces, and I play in secular spirituality spaces. So I play in all the playgrounds, and I'm
Mhm.
comfortable in playing in all the playgrounds, and adjusting language, because this is just a human experience, and
Right.
spirituality is a human experience. So in that way, I don't have a specific thing, but the terms I like to use, if someone's asking, and I'm trying to find a short way to say this whole story, right,
Right.
is I really like these dual terms that are coming out. There's a lot of them. It'll be like religious humanist, which is,
Mhm.
I'm a humanist. I believe that in human progress and human values, but that there's something to be gained by studying religion.
Mm.
Or atheist mystic,
Mm.
or rational mystic, or there's these kind of dual terms that are coming out that I find really interesting, of like, I'm skeptical about the God thing and the next life thing. I have some skepticism. I even have some religious trauma around those things.
Mhm.
But spirituality is super interesting to me. I consider myself a spiritual person. I have spiritual experiences. I study rituals. I participate in rituals. I have various kinds of contemplation practices, right? And so, kind of those dual terms are probably the best space for me, of just, I'm skeptical in the God area, but very, very open to how can we dig out these tools of spirituality that are just really helpful, really,
Mhm.
really helpful, and really beautiful parts of being human. So, yeah, mystic atheist,
Yeah, I love that. I
maybe.
love that. Isn't that funny? Because and I don't think I had left the religion when I think it was just because I moved to Arizona, and you move to Arizona and you have to start collecting crystals. I think there's something in the law that
Yeah,
says that. Oh, you're only
yeah,
2 hours away from Sedona, get a crystal,
yep. Hmm.
And so I did this course on crystal study, and I realized I didn't have enough space in my brain to remember what all these crystals were and what they were specifically, and there were too many. Like I thought, oh, okay, the green one is a such and such, and this is for that chakra. And there's like, oh, but there's 4 different greens, and you have to know which green one is. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't. I have time in my brain
Yeah,
for
so
that.
keep going, and then I have a
No,
response
that's
to that.
all. But that,
Yeah.
so it's
But
like, okay, I have
so
my
when
crystal, but
when
I'm
I
like,
say, I'm skeptical to beliefs, but I want the spiritual tool, I do that with New Age spirituality also. So New Age spirituality, the tarot cards especially, I don't think
mm,
most parents realize, how much their kids are getting spirituality from TikTok tarot readers. And
mm,
so I'm interested in in paganism, I've participated in various pagan groups here, and crystals and tarot. And so what I'm always trying to do, and again, this is just my personal approach to spirituality that feels safest to me and also feels really safe to people who have religious trauma, which is, okay, what is the tool? What is happening here? And how can I access that tool with as little demands on my beliefs as possible?
Hmm.
So you can, for example, when I have a friend who does tarot, who I really resonate with, because she's not too woo, where she's trying to convince me of things where my brain just can't go with her, and then I kind of shut down. But if you flip a tarot card and it's something like a phoenix, and it's like, okay, what in you right now needs to die so that something else can come to life?
Mhm.
That is an amazing question. That's a
Right.
fantastic question to ask yourself at any time. That's a
Mhm.
fantastic question to talk out with someone else who can hold space for that.
Mhm.
That's a fantastic pattern to look for in your life, because now your brain is kind of primed to be looking for that pattern because you've
Mhm.
just been talking about it. So that's the tool, right? There's something happening there, with symbolism, with archetype. It's a conversation between your conscious and your subconscious. There's
Mhm.
a lot of science there. Carl Jung, there's a lot there.
Mhm.
Now, I want to get that tool or get that practice or get that experience. And I don't want to have to believe that the universe spun in such a way that I drew that card and I could only have drawn that card today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because now that requires me to do a lot of belief work. Now I have to have a whole grand narrative of the universe, and I have to understand it all. And I have to, the universe is just kind of spinning just for me.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of science in there that just really breaks down when you get into it. And so, again, it's no matter what the religion is or the spirituality is, including new age, it's like, what is actually happening at the root level, and
Mhm.
how can I get that without having to believe in horoscopes, which is difficult for me. I can't get
Mhm.
there scientifically.
Right.
Crystals, there is such ritualistic power in, you can do this with anything. you can
Mhm.
you can pick up this pen and say, this is my forgiveness pen, and when
Mhm.
I feel like I need to forgive people or tap into that, I hold this pen and it prompts me to go into that space. Does that work? Absolutely, it works.
Right.
Scientifically, rituals will speed up the process of whatever you're doing, processing something, or getting into a brain space for something. But I want that tool. I want to be able to do that without having to be forced to believe something that's hard to believe, because
Right.
then, especially if you're coming from a high demand religion, your
Mhm.
BS meter is going to show up at some point, and then, like you said, you're just shut down. Like, I can't do all these colors.
Right.
I'm so overwhelmed with this that I'm just not going to do this anymore. And
Right.
so, that's kind of the game that I play, is how can we get these tools with as um, little truth claims about ultimate reality that I think we're just bad at as humans. And I think
Mhm.
we just need to back away from playing that game, because historically, trying to make a big giant story that describes ultimate reality, we're just not very good at it. And I'm okay
Right.
just letting that go and saying we don't know.
Right. I love that analogy because you're right. Like if I choose to carry a lapis stone to a speaking event because that's supposed to be my voice chakra, whatever, it's like, great. What's it going to hurt for me to have a blue stone in my pocket if if that just gives me the anti-anxiety, that's the anti-anxiety pill that I choose to take is a blue stone in my pocket. And what's the harm in that? And then I'm like you, it's like, and there was a wonderful lady that knew her horoscopes, and she was doing the whole Mercury's and Venus passing through, whatever. And I was just like, you lost me 45 minutes ago. I don't know what you're talking about. And I just don't have any brain space left for that. But Enneagrams, I like that much better than giving me a
Me too.
horoscope,
Yeah, me too.
because I can see that more in this, just these patterns of similar people and, this kind
Yeah,
of
and
stuff.
Enneagram is great because it doesn't force you to believe anything. It's like, here's a tool
Mhm.
of, when you're younger and, we've noticed patterns when people are seeking for love and attention, or they're wanting to deal with their own pain or rejection. These are kind of human patterns. And I love doing Enneagrams with people. And I that's one of those tools that, like, you can get a lot out of that tool without having to believe or get overwhelmed with whatever Venus is doing in order to access that tool. And so I'm totally on board with the Enneagram thing, because it just doesn't make any big truth claims. And so I can use it as a tool, and I enjoy that tool too. So what Enneagram are you?
Well, I think I'm a 3. What about you?
I'm a 4 with a 5 wing.
Yeah,
so a deep thinker feeler.
Yeah. I suspected that. I thought, I bet she's an Enneagram 4. And, and my husband is definitely a 2. I mean, the guy would like stripping off his clothes to run across the street and change somebody's tire and give him a coat. And, it just makes me
My husband's a 3, and he's a goal setter, go getter. Yeah.
It's so funny. But the thing I like about Enneagrams too is that it does show you the shadow side. So it's not just like, oh, you're an Aries. Oh, that means you're going to be a movie star and you're this and you're that.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, it also means you're like a little bit narcissistic.
I 100% agree that, Enneagram work is great for showing you your blind spots, and also great for really explaining how people are fundamentally different and how they're operating, and their operating system is different. But yeah, like you said, when you get too far into certain kinds of tarot reading or horoscopes, it's like, you're not responsible for being a scatterbrain today. It's because Mercury's in retrograde. And so it's like, it's Mercury. And so the universe then becomes your scapegoat, which is very common in religion. Even Jesus is used to, Jesus is used as the ultimate scapegoat. But anytime you can just use whatever the spiritual tool for spiritual bypassing, which is, I don't have to feel this thing, I don't have to deal with this thing, that's not spirituality. That is just spiritual bypassing, which is just, it's not something we need to feel shame about, because being a human is hard, but it is just a security blanket. It's not doing it's not doing for you any more than a security blanket is. So yeah, being able to forgive yourself for making I saw this thing on Instagram. It was like, if you texted your ex while you were drunk this week, it's because the planets were doing this. And it's like, no. You need to face that you got drunk and texted your ex. Like, you still have to face that. Like, you still have to do some work around that. You can't just blame that on the planets. Like, that is classic spiritual bypassing. So yeah, this is, I love these conversations, because it's really just getting into what is actually going on here, and what are the tools that are helpful, and what is the bathwater, the spiritual bypassing, the truth claims, the shame that we can just let go of, and say that this is not spirituality that speaks to me.
Yeah. So it's, speaking of spirituality, so you are a spirituality coach, and you have you offer different services on your no nonsense spirituality.com website. It shows the different services. And one of the services that you offer is an upcoming course. Is that correct? That you're going to be, tell us a little bit about what that's going to entail.
Yeah, so that course is on there. It's essentially, a lot of my clients are on the Mormon spectrum somewhere. Not all of them, but it's a place where I resonate with people. And so over time, being a spiritual director, where you're coming from Mormonism, what happens is, I go back to this analogy where, your spiritual home has taken some hits in this faith crisis, but the scaffolding is all there. Like, the Mormon ways of thinking are still all there. And then the tools to rebuild are poisoned in a sense, because you have religious trauma wrapped around it. And so people essentially get stuck, it's stuck in this, it's like a building where the walls are down and the scaffolding is still up, and they can't move forward, right? There's these common places that people get stuck. And so what I was doing is, if I were to work with a client over a year of like, let's rebuild this together, there were things that I was essentially doing with everyone, because it's just something that we're going to have to do and address. And so what I did is, I just thought, rather than meet with each client and go through this process of spiritual reconstruction, where I seem to be hitting these similar things across the board with people, why don't I create a course where I kind of do that? So if if money is an object, or time is an object, or having kids in the background and Zooming with me is a barrier, really being able to provide this course so that you could do this work with a workbook, with me talking about these things and having you sit down and actually write and work through these things and essentially rebuild your spiritual home and how that looks for you. And so there's 10 areas of well-being that I've kind of found I went over with everyone for this kind of second half of life. So it's going to be rituals. That first Christmas after your faith crisis, it's kind of hard. Like, how do I want to do this? Right. It's like you're sitting in your home and you have all these heirlooms and it's like, well, what do I put on the walls and what do I give to the thrift store? Like, there's a lot there we're going to have to work through. Exploring death. Most of my clients have to re-mourn someone after a faith transition because you can't lean on those spiritual bypassing thought-ending cliches of grandma's in heaven now. We don't have to think about this.
We'll be together again someday.
We'll be together. Yeah, we're just going to bypass all these emotions, and then boom, you have a faith crisis, and those emotions come back to you. And so we go through that. Morality and ethics. How do I make sense of right and wrong when that was all wrapped up into God, and now my views of God have changed? That is, having a moral compass is essential for having the good life or a happy life. And so we're going to have to find a way to shift your foundation when it comes to morality and ethics. Rewriting your sacred story. So, religions are powerful because they give you a story, like you are here and here's the bigger story. And then when that story no longer fits you, you essentially need to rewrite your own and take that pen and say, okay, I'm writing this chapter now. And what does that look like for you? Meaning and purpose is a big one, confronting suffering around deep questions about existence and what does it all mean. We can make sense of that even in not knowing, right? So I'm not answering that saying, I'm a theologian and here is my worldview. I approach it as, if we're never going to know for sure what all this is about, how can we build a life of meaning and purpose anyway in the face of that? And there are ways to do that. Shadow and inner child work that you've talked about on this podcast before, especially for women, that inner child work. Well, both are really important because, there are good emotions and bad emotions that you're raised with as a Mormon woman, and we hide our bad emotions. So shadow work is really important. And then that inner child voice, if I meet with a Mormon spectrum client who's a female, I know almost instinctually that we're going to have to do some inner child work because at some age you told your voice to be quiet, and we essentially have to find her again. And you know that, and you've talked about that on this podcast before. The science of awe and transcendence, whatever higher power means to you or whatever transcendence means to you. There's 7 kinds of contemplation practices, and we go over which one really resonates with you, which is what we just talked about. I'd prefer to go on a walk rather than sit on a mat. Community and inspiration. So how do I rebuild a tribe? And inspiration is, okay, if the prophet is no longer resonating with you, who are your inspirational prophets that you need to have in your ear? Because we still need that, even if you're redefining what that is now. Even if Brene Brown is your prophet now, finding ways to have inspiration. Order and chaos, and how to be situated in between the two, and then pulling that all together into what does a flourishing life look like for you, those later stages of human development and Maslow's hierarchy and all those things. So when you put it together, it's essentially like a vision or a map that, instead of being stuck in this home and not knowing how to rebuild it, it's okay, like, here's 10 options for a fireplace. Which one do you like? Oh, I like this one. Okay, let's put that there. And we essentially are rebuilding. It's a template to rebuild your own spiritual home after faith deconstruction. So this is specifically a reconstruction course. And that's on my website. And so if that resonates with you, man, I know that I'd really like to do that work, and I'd like to be able to do it on my own timetable. that's on my website, and I've gotten some pretty good response from that so far, and so I'm really
That's
proud of that.
exciting.
It took me about a year to put together, so I'm very proud of putting that together for people because I wanted everybody to have a chance, no matter, what your walk of life is, to be able to rebuild your spiritual home after a faith crisis, because I know that work is really hard and it took me a decade to do, and I want to be able to make that process easier for other people.
Right, right. That's so interesting. I'm excited to get involved in that because I'm kind of to the point where up until my faith crisis, I'm not going to use that word, my faith change.
Mhm.
Then I always kind of poo-pooed and discarded people who talked about their childhood trauma. And I'm sure it was a defense type thing where it's like, look, if I start complaining about my childhood and what I didn't get as a child, then I'm just opening up the door for my 6 kids to go, let's talk about that, mom, because you weren't there for me either. Or,
Mm.
and I'm sure I was like, I don't want to go there because we all can't blame everything on our moms.
Mm.
But the more that I've studied and the more people and the more podcasts, and like I said, everything that's available to us today, then I start realizing it's like, wait, there's a reason why I'm a loner. There's a reason why I isolate myself because that's all I've ever done. I was the only girl, and my older brother went and lived with my dad when he was 15. And then I took care of my half brother who was 8 years younger. And so I spent a lot of time in my head
Mm.
and in my Beach Boys albums and pretending and this kind of stuff. And so I'm still doing that. And so I was like, oh, and you're talking about feelings and the ability to express your feelings. And I'm like, yeah, we didn't do that. And I didn't do that well with my kids either. And my girls, I know, are doing such a better job as far as being able to communicate with their kids and stuff like that. So it was almost a fear. It's like, look, if I let myself go there, and then I'm going to also open the door for my kids to go, and this is what we
Mhm.
didn't get. And I was like, no, don't
Yeah.
do that to me. I can't do everything wrong. I have that favorite part of that movie, the birdcage, when the mom is like, somebody has to love me best.
Mm.
So, but that's just part of it. It's part of the
That is
deconstruction.
part of it, and that is
Mhm.
where, therapists are fantastic, and I refer people to therapists when I'm like, "Okay, we're getting to an area that's outside my training." I wouldn't do mixed faith marriage counseling,
Right.
or anything like that because I don't have the credentials, and I'm very safe around that. But that space that you're talking about there, where there's a fear that's blocking you from doing deeper work, that's where spiritual directors can be very helpful because they'll be able to see that and say, okay, why are we afraid to, what's coming up with you, why are we afraid to open this up, and what is your ego saying will happen if we look at your shadow for a little bit?
Yeah.
What is your ego resisting there? And
Yeah.
then having that, by giving it some words and kind of holding your hand in the process, that's where spiritual directors, I have my own spiritual directors who continue to do that process with me, and then I enjoy doing that process with other people because it's a lot easier to do with someone else who can see that fear a lot more
Yeah.
clearly because they don't have their own ego wrapped up into it and their own blind
Right.
spots, and so sometimes someone else can see that and be able to kind of walk you through that versus trying to do it on your own, where it's like you're playing a game of hide and seek with yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm excited. Well, this is just going to be, I'm sorry for you because, I'm going to be working with you soon. And,
Very excited.
I'm very excited. It's like, how much time is a session again? You're going to be like, and that session is over. Please go away. But it is something that, you have to let go of and delve into to find the peace and the to be like you're saying to be able to. And I love that analogy as an interior designer. It's like, look, this place just has to go down. The whole place has to go down.
Mhm.
We can't just redo countertops here because turn around, look what you got looking at you as those old cabinets. So the whole
Yeah.
place has to go down. So that's a great analogy for me anyway.
That's good because,
Um,
yeah, if you were looking at a tumbling, asbestos-filled apartment and someone's just saying, "I'm just really struggling and I feel like I'm hitting rock bottom," and then what's going to happen to me? If you have, if you're an interior designer, you can say, oh, we can build something better than this. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay. It's, some walls are going to have to come down, and that's going to hurt. That's going to feel very vulnerable to not have some of these safety things. But man, we can rebuild something so beautiful here. And
Yeah.
that's the benefit of doing this fear work, which I do with everyone, including myself, and that my spiritual directors still do with me, is that getting to those fears that are driving your behavior is really the key to ultimate freedom that you can have as a human. That I'm not
Right.
being driven by my subconscious fears. There's usually 4: death, isolation, meaninglessness, freedom. And so digging into those deep fears are the way that you really mindfully create a life that isn't driven by fear, but driven by love and purpose and meaning and what you want to do with your life experience. We may only have one,
Right.
and that's where you can really tap into just a lot more freedom than I used to have when I was more driven by my fear of, I don't want to let go of God. I don't
Yeah.
want to let go of this space with my family that I worked so hard to recreate, when I was in high school, and I had to repair all of those family bonds, and that was so painful. And so to lose it again, and I was the first one in my family to step away from the church. um, you know there was a lot of fear there, driving a lot of suffering. And so
Right.
getting to that root is really a path of a lot of freedom and peace.
That's amazing. I love that those 4 things you just mentioned. And especially because I just watched a special the other day. They were talking about, oh, I love 60 Minutes Australia. It's so much better than 60 Minutes America. And they had a thing on women who go through midlife crises and how it's looked at compared to men who go through, but living in Arizona has taught me, I've never been around so many 80-year-old people in my life. And this last month or two that I've gone through some medical stuff with my son. And so I've been in the hospital and in emergency rooms and this kind of stuff. And they're just filled with older people. And so the fear of aging, the fear of death, the fear of meaninglessness is so much more on my mind now that I am on my own. Like, I feel like I'm on my own. Not that I think I was one of those people that was probably silently nuanced, because I would hear things and people would say things. I remember, being in the temple and they would say things and I'd go, oh, please, and but then it was just like, whatever, it'll work itself out. I didn't really think about it. So I wasn't like, but we're all going to be together. And that to me was easy to go, yeah, that's not happening, because I didn't even believe it then. But not having the community, not that moving, I lost my community when we moved anyway. So, and that, when you move at a different age, when you don't have young kids, you're not involved in the, nobody's playing baseball, nobody's at the football games. We don't have young women's or young men's or, Boy Scouts or any of those activities anymore. That just happens no matter what religion you are, that as you age, you lose your friends, you lose your community, and it ends up being you and your husband going to Joann's Fabrics. And it's kind of interesting, but, so I didn't necessarily lose my community, because I think I already lost it when we moved. But you do lose your community in many, many other ways, Anyway, so I'm very interested to find out more about that whole course that you're offering, because I think it's going to bring a lot of peace and just stability in my life. And I love that you, like you said, you are addressing the women's side of spirituality, which I think is so important and different. It's just different.
It is different. Even
Yeah.
thinking about kind of the age demographic that you find you and your husband in, there are so many women who are in the church at that age. And it's so interesting that, when COVID happened, we did kind of a poll, Generous did a poll, and Mormon women kind of responded that they enjoyed the time off. They enjoyed not packing the toddler bags. They enjoyed just reading a book on Sunday, enjoyed having a break. And the men really missed church, especially elders quorum, because women we're maybe able to replace some of those, keep friendships, and it's socially acceptable for women to get together and talk about their husbands and kids and life and things like that.
Mhm.
But the men, without that church piece, felt a lack of meaning, felt like they didn't have any voice or value,
Mhm.
and felt extremely isolated, to the point that, like, I miss church so much. And so we had this disconnect of women being like, I just really loved the break because I was really burning out. And the
Mhm.
men saying, I really missed, because when a man puts a suit on, and especially if you're older in the church, you walk in and you're presiding, and
Yeah.
hey, what do you think about this topic? Oh, let me tell you my words of wisdom, right? It's
Exactly.
almost instant meaning.
Yeah.
And so I don't have any so especially the older men in the church who have these kind of higher callings, it does give quite a bit of meaning and value. But the
Absolutely.
issue is, it comes on the backs of women who
Exactly.
are burned out, who are doing the sign-up sheets, who are watching the kids, who are teaching the classes, who are running the mutual and making these, fantastic activities. And so, yeah, we have to be able to look at that and say, okay, what am I really wanting out of my spirituality? What am I really wanting out of a spiritual community?
Right.
Because these statistics are really just showing that the women are carrying the burden of unpaid labor and unrecognized labor also,
Right.
so that the men can have a place to feel really special. And that
Yeah.
comes at a cost for us.
Yeah. 100%. Absolutely. And especially like you say, when you have authoritarian callings, and once a bishop, always a bishop. And so, and in the church, it's such a small community. You can go anywhere in the world, you're going to run into somebody that you knew, or in one of the wards that you've lived in some part of your life. And then if you were a man in authority, then to them, you're like, Bishop, oh my gosh, you were my bishop when I was in young men's. And I
Mhm.
mean, if that isn't
Just
just like a,
imagine even going to church. Sometimes I play these flip games in order to, like, be like, wow. Imagine going to church and you're the bishop or you're the stake president, and you go into a meeting of just men, and they're talking about, I don't know, some topic, justice, compassion, doesn't matter what it is. And they all stop because they've been debating, and they say, well, Rene, can you pipe in here? What do you think about this? And they're all men just looking at you for your wisdom on what you've learned about compassion. And you get to share your little 5-minute piece. That would make you feel pretty special. That would
yeah,
make you feel pretty like, wow, I am just so wise, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
but no, even on lessons of, love and compassion, things that so-called women are we're
lauded.
so
Yeah,
much better at, and all these things,
yeah,
you still don't get the opportunity to really speak in that way. And so
no,
it
exactly.
really requires women to get honest about what are you really wanting, and how
Yeah,
can you show up in the world vulnerably so that you can resonate with other people who are wanting that, and make a little tribe for yourself.
yeah, that's so important because I mean, I remember telling my husband, I remember sitting in sacrament meeting and my grandson was living with us. And so, even though I've got 6 kids, they're all grown and gone, but I still have my one that I have to get dressed and pack a bag for and the whole thing. But and now I also have a grandson that's 8 years old, and I'm getting him dressed and packing junk for him. And the stake president was visiting, and he stood up at the pulpit and he said, whenever I think, oh, I'm just so tired, I don't want to go to church today, I look down and I see TJ and I go, you know what? If TJ can be here, I can be here. And I'm like, how do you think TJ
Oh
got here?
my
I mean,
gosh.
I didn't even get credit for that. It was like my husband sitting
Wow.
on the stand because he's in the bishopric. He left way early all by himself. And I'm just like, dang, we don't even get recognized for getting those
Wow.
people there.
Yeah.
And I just thought, wow, invisible or what? I mean, it was
Yes,
just
it's
amazing.
the unpaid labor, and then the invisible, yeah, just the invisible labor, and how much wisdom you have from that experience, right?
Yeah,
That we could just tap into, but because women don't have that space, it's just wisdom that's lost to the community, and that hurts all of us. That hurts
Yeah.
all of us.
It really does. Oh my gosh, Brittany, you are amazing. Well, everyone, once again, it's no-nonsense-spirituality.com. Get on her website. Almost Awakened. Do you have a like set time every Wednesday or
Yeah,
Tuesday?
we podcast every Tuesday at 1:00.
Okay. And it's live, but then is it
Yeah.
also then the next day or immediately put on
Yeah, that day, Bill will do all the tech
all
stuff. We
this
were
stuff?
talking off air that he's so good
Yeah.
with the tech stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we're continuing to have conversations about what's next. So that maybe looking at our biases and really understanding that, or we looked at the bite model a few weeks ago, where we
Yeah.
understand cults and how to uncult yourself after a cult, and that was really
Right.
interesting. And continuing to get bigger and guests in this space of spirituality, more like non-denominational spirituality,
Yeah.
because I
Right.
feel like that's where we are. Mormonism is part of a bigger story of deconstruction, right? We're deconstructing a lot of things. We're deconstructing a
Exactly.
lot of systems and institutions. But part of that, and there's a growing group of nuns, NONES, of I don't
Oh,
have a particular religious affiliation. And so this movement of, this organized religion narrative isn't really working for me, but I'm not sure how to figure out what comes next. It's something that you are not the only one in that space, and Mormonism is not the only player in that space. It's something that's
exactly.
really a part of the time in history that we are in right now, which is we're
Yeah.
deconstructing, and we don't know how we're going to rebuild after that.
Right.
But you do not have to be alone in that journey, because there's a lot of us who are in that place. And so let's band together and try to figure it out together.
Exactly. And I love that. I love your episode that you did about the Gen Z and where they fall into deconstruction and faith and acceptance and what they're willing to put up with and not put up with. That was very interesting. Was that
I'm
part of the bike
really
one? Can't remember.
No, that was its own. I'm really
Okay.
excited about Gen Z and working with Gen Z.
Hold on. I gotta turn my
Yeah.
phone. Oh, okay. Hold on.
Renee's got Hotel California singing in the background. Hold on. We got it.
That microphone is really good. And it's like, where is my sound? Like,
It's okay.
Yeah.
This thought is interrupted by Hotel California. Okay.
There you go. There you go. Best band in the world, people. Eagles. Go on. Yeah.
I was raised on the Eagles. I have a great love for that song.
Yeah.
The Gen Z is super interesting. I'll be working with Uplift Kids, if people are familiar with that. I really want to work with them on developing some teen content, because you and I are in a space where we're talking about second half of life spirituality, and that's just where we are in our journey. But with teens, they still need first half of life spirituality.
Right.
And so when they're not getting that from the churches, even if they go to church, it seems like they're not really resonating with kind of this pew-based, worship. The question is, how do we give them all those tools that were helpful for our identity and our ego and our safety and our sense of self and our community? How can we get that to Gen Z, because that piece is really missing? So I'm really excited to explore that. Nobody's figured that out yet, but it's a place that, hey, like, I meet tons of parents who are like, okay, I really find myself, I think I'm a secular Buddhist, and I feel like I'm stable in my faith journey, but I have no idea what to do with my 16-year-old. I have no idea to have these conversations. I have no idea to model spirituality to them. This is just what speaks to me.
Right.
And so I'm really excited for future projects that will address that big need, because we have a pretty big generation of teenagers coming up that, have a lot of anxiety, they're dealing with questions of meaning and purpose far younger than we did.
Yes.
And so I have a lot of love for that age group. And when I used to teach seminary and when I used to teach high school, I really love that age group. And so I hope to be able to do some future projects with that.
That's so great. That's so great. Wow, wonderful. Well, thank heavens there's people out there like you that are out there for those of us that are like wandering or like help, I don't know even where to go.
It's so
And,
funny to even hear you say that, because I just feel like I've been like Moses, like I'm here because of 40 years of wandering. And
yeah,
at
yeah,
every point I felt like I was wandering, but
right,
hopefully, when you've been wandering for a while, hopefully you can help other people in their wandering too. And
exactly.
people help me just like that too.
Exactly. And that's how it works.
And
That's
that's
how it
how it
works.
works.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
it's like we're all hikers, and it's like, you know what, I've been on a hike like this, or I've been on a cliff face like this, and here's a knot that really helped me, and whatever the tool is, and that's really what we can do for each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Oh,
Go
my
pick up
pleasure,
your
Renee.
kids. I know you have things you have to do. There's always things that we have to do, right?
Always,
It
yeah.
never stops. And I think that's so interesting because when your kids are little and you have kind of control over their life. Although I have an 8-year-old granddaughter that you haven't been able to control her since she was, a newborn.
I have one of those.
Yeah, I love it because she's not my daughter, but I watch her. My daughter will say, Mom, she's not going to wear that outfit. I'm like, oh, but it's so cute. I'm like, just let me, here, honey, try on this pink jacket. She's like, I'm not wearing that.
Mhm.
I'm like, what? And so I can't wait to watch you grow up. I love it, but they don't, you don't understand that once you're a mom forever, it never goes away. You've always got the worry and you've always got the responsibility and you've always got they're in the back of your head. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop for some reason or another. And so you just go from you either have to pick them up, from the bus
Yeah.
stop or,
Yeah, I
fly
got a couple playing that have been in the background. I got a couple coming home on the bus stop. And you're right, there's always that percentage of my brain that's listening to you, but also listening to them and making sure they're not killing each other. And
Exactly.
the beautiful thing is when you claim that as a hero's journey, and as spiritual, and as empowering, and as meaningful, when you can really claim that for all that it is, but not recognized to be, it gives you just a little bit more permission to enjoy it, even
Exactly.
in the struggles.
And finding the joy in
Yeah.
the struggles, even if you've got a more of a purpose, for sure.
Yes.
Oh, I love it.
What's that quote from Viktor Frankl that's like, he who has a why can bear almost any how. I have a why in adopting my children. It gives me a lot of meaning, and focusing on that, even when the how is really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, having that be a part of your spiritual journey can really change your view of motherhood, especially when I'm in an age where I'm still changing diapers, so they're still very young.
Yeah.
And
I'm in an age where I'm still changing diapers too.
you're changing diapers too, yeah.
Yeah. It's like not as
And
much, but yeah.
reclaiming that as powerful spiritual work can
Love
give a
that.
lot of voice to an otherwise just really hard, sometimes lonely and isolating journey. And I hope that for every woman, because it just breaks my heart how we just don't value ourselves because the religious traditions we've been in haven't seen that as spiritual work when it is.
That's the best. That's the best message of all.
Mm.
Well, thank you again. And I look forward to your other podcasts, and I look forward to working with you on my spiritual journey. And thank you for taking time out of your day today, because I know that
Renee.
it is a great expense.
I appreciate your voice in this space. And I loved the podcast you did with the Mormon hippie. That's been my favorite. Yeah, I really liked that one. She's been an interesting journey to watch. And I love your approach, and I love just all the reclaiming work that you're also doing in this space of reclaiming things that we lost as women that need to be voiced in order for us to heal and move forward.
Exactly. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. All right. Bye-bye, Brittany.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, you guys, you have to listen to Almost Awakened and listen to Brittany. She did a solo podcast last week, and it was fabulous. And you just have to listen to her wisdom. It's so amazing. So anyway, catch you later.
Bye now.
Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. And I hope you all are planning wonderful activities for the Thanksgiving holiday. I have my whole family coming to Arizona. We're heating up the pool right now, and we can't wait. We've actually got our kids coming in on Sunday, and they're going to stay for the whole week. It's going to be amazing. And the best part of the holiday is all my kids said, "Mom, don't do anything. We're going to do the whole dinner." And I was like, oh, I love it. So I can't wait. It's going to be exciting. And I hope you will also find joy. So we'll talk again in December. Not going to be talking this week because I'm going to be busy with family and friends. So I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. I will talk with you again in December. Okay, bye-bye.